So let's talk about the Revolutionary War in the North. If you have your battle scoreboard with you, this is battles numbers 1 through 7. We'll talk through some of these. You can record some notes on your battle scoreboard. If you miss something, it's okay to go back and replay some of the video. It's also okay to look some of these things up online, and you can find information about any of these battles very, very easily. Let's start, though, with the British overall strategy. The British think that of these 13 colonies, all the problems are up here in the Boston area. So they're going to start by invading in New England and fighting there. That's not going to go very well. So they're going to pull out of New England and move the war into the middle colonies. We've learned about these regions earlier in our class. Well, there are some things that are going to go well for the British in the middle colonies, but eventually things don't go that well. They're going to pull out of the middle colonies and try the southern colonies, where there are a lot more loyalists. The British believe if they can invade in Georgia and South Carolina, fight their way north back into Virginia, Maryland, into the middle colonies, they'll be able to win this war. Well, all of that is going to go very badly eventually, and the British will just quit. But that's their overall strategy. New England first, then middle colonies, then southern colonies. Previously, we have learned about advantages and disadvantages. We know the British have a much bigger population, they have better manufacturing, they have more money, they have a better army, they have a way better navy. In fact, the Americans don't even have a navy. The Americans have some advantages with leaders, not just American leaders like George Washington, Benedict Arnold, Horatio Gates, Nathaniel Greene, Alexander Hamilton, and others. They have a lot of foreign help because there are a lot of people who don't like the British. So the Marquis de Lafayette, among others, are important foreign leaders who help the Americans. The Americans have an advantage in geography in that we're close to home. We understand the conditions and the geography in a way that the British just don't. Now, our story is that the American Revolution begins at Lexington, April 19th, 1775. The British are going to march out of Boston and go out here to Concord, where they have learned the Americans are storing up weapons. Now, the famous Paul Revere story comes along, where Paul Revere is a part of the warning system. Paul Revere works with the committees of correspondence. He's a big patriot, certainly supports the American side. He wants to help people understand where the British are leaving Boston, how they're going to get out here to Concord. So he actually is over here on a hill, near a hill called Bunker Hill, a place called Charleston, Massachusetts. He's watching for a signal of 2 or 1 lantern in a church up here in Boston, the Old North Church. 1 lamp should be lit in that church tower if the British are going to march out by land and move to Concord this way. Well, that means it'll be much slower. It'll take a lot longer for the British to get there. If the British are going to go by sea, then there should be 2 lanterns in the church tower. Not really by sea, it's really by harbor. That means the British are getting in boats, rowing across Charleston Harbor, and marching out to Concord this direction, which will be much, much faster for them. That's the signal Paul Revere is waiting for. Are the British going by land or by sea? You've heard about Paul Revere because of a famous poem written about him, about the 19th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that day and year. So Paul Revere takes off for Lexington to warn John Adams and John Hancock that the British are coming. Sam Adams especially has had to move out of his house in Boston because of the Quartering Act. He has too many soldiers all over the place looking for him. Well, the British leave Boston the early morning of April 1775, march through Lexington, where a firefight happens, and that's the shot heard round the world that begins our war. The British march on to Concord, fight there, but by that time, Minutemen are everywhere. People who are able to drop what they're doing and go respond in a minute. Did Paul Revere actually get to Concord and warn people that the British are coming? No, he didn't. He actually failed. Paul Revere was captured. Now, he's not the only person out warning people that the British are coming. His friend Billy Dawes is captured with him, and they are going to, another guy's going to escape, get to Concord, warn the people there that the British are coming. And so the people in Concord are able to hide most of the ammunition and stuff they've stored up. So that's the story. The British have to march back through Lexington, being shot at the entire way, running back to Boston. Today's Boston Marathon is run on some of those same roads. Kind of an interesting insult to the British still, with people today running the Boston Marathon on some of the same roads the British were running on, fleeing for their lives back into Boston. So that's a big deal that the war is started in April 1775 with the Lexington story. Our next battle is Fort Ticonderoga, way up here in northern New York. New York City is a big important place. Boston's out here, big important place, and that's where Lexington is. We know that the Americans really don't have any way to manufacture war materials. They don't have any money to buy war materials. Where are you going to get them if you can't make them and you can't buy them? Well, you're going to have to steal them from the British. And that's what the story of Fort Ticonderoga is all about. Fort Ty is a big British fort that was built during the French and Indian War, loaded with cannons and supplies and some really old broken down soldiers who aren't that much good anymore. A lot of the British soldiers in the fort are really just kind of hanging on, waiting for retirement almost. They're in this fort that's really not that useful because, well, it was okay during the French and Indian War, but now that that's over and the French aren't a threat, well, they don't really need Fort Ty. They don't really need all those cannons, so the fort is pretty lightly defended. There's Fort Ticonderoga today. You can park in the parking lot. You can walk out and visit the fort, go in the same front door that George Washington and many other famous people went through. Well, the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, if you like blood and guts and action, it's probably not really the story for you. Because what happens is Fort Ty is on a piece of land that's really important along the Hudson River. Why do we care about this place? Well, it's a strategic location. And also, it's full of cannons and supplies we need. Ethan Allen is a guy from what is now Vermont. Biggest, hugest guy around. He could outfight, outdrink, and outswear anybody. He operates a group of, a mob with guns called the Green Mountain Boys. They decide they're going to go capture Fort Ticonderoga. Well, there's the Green Mountain Boys flag. Benedict Arnold is a actual military commander sent to go with Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys. They don't get along at all. Neither Benedict Arnold nor Ethan Allen is about to play number two to anybody. But ultimately, they can set aside their differences. They capture Fort Ticonderoga in May of 1775 in upstate New York. The Americans win. Benedict Arnold is a big name. Ethan Allen's a big name. The Green Mountain Boys are a big name. It's all a big deal to capture all these guns and things. And it's really not much of a trick. Here's the commander of the fort surrendering without a shot being fired. Fort Ty is such an important story that if you go to Arlington National Cemetery and you visit the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers, which would be just through this wall, you'll see the names of some of America's biggest battles around the proscenium here. Lexington is one. Fort Ticonderoga is one. Really important victories in American history. The next battle on here is Bunker Hill at Arlington National Cemetery. The President of the United States goes to, usually on Memorial Day or sometimes on Veterans Day or sometimes both in a year, to give a speech at Arlington National Cemetery, and it's a pretty big deal. You might have heard of Ticonderoga pencils. Well, they are named for the man who founded the pencil company. This pencil company had a grandfather who served at Fort Ticonderoga, or Fort Ty, because that's what everybody calls it. So if you have a pencil in your hand that says Ticonderoga, well, it is named for Fort Ty, the very one we were just talking about. What the Americans need to do is get those cannons out of Fort Ticonderoga and down to Boston. Well, that's going to take a while. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to have to be done through the winter, but it's going to be a big deal later on. Now, the British know the Americans are going to try to put those cannons from Fort Ty in the Boston area and put them on hills north of Boston and force the British out of Boston. So the British need to attack and drive the Americans off of Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill north of town. This is a view of Boston from Bunker Hill. See all kinds of British soldiers down here and some Americans. Well, the Americans control Bunker Hill, where the perspective is from this artist, looking down into Boston. So the Battle of Bunker Hill, which takes place in um, June of 1775, the British are going to attack Americans on Bunker Hill. The British are trying to fight their way up Bunker Hill, trying to force away the Americans, and they do. But boy, the British are beaten up badly in the process. They win, but just barely. In fact, sometimes we call this a Pyrrhic kind of victory. You know, you win the battle, but you're so badly beat up, you can't fight again for a while. And it gives the Americans some hope that, hey, maybe we can actually beat this big, well-trained, well-equipped, well-funded army. Well, from there, the Americans decide, hey, if the Americans want to be part of a revolution to get rid of the British, maybe the Canadians will too. So we're going to launch an expedition up into Montreal and Quebec. The next couple of battles on your scoreboard. Actually, Montreal, it's pretty easy for the Americans to capture Montreal. We're going to win there. But by the time we get to Quebec, it's late December of 1775. Americans are trying to come at Quebec from a couple different directions, including Benedict Arnold coming across what is now Maine in a really, really difficult situation. We're not going to capture Quebec. You know, Benedict Arnold's army and the army from Montreal get here to Quebec. They're looking at the city to attack, and it's hard work, and it's December. We kind of have three options. We could either attack, which we know we'll lose. We can sit and wait through the winter. That won't work. Or we can just surrender. Well, of course, we don't want to do that. So we decide, well, we might as well attack and see what happens. But it goes really badly. The American army is crushed. Benedict Arnold badly wounded. And, well, Canada's not going to join the Americans in the revolution. Benedict Arnold at Quebec, unfortunately, is shot. He's going to take a long time to recover. This will begin sort of the process of him becoming one of the most famous traitors to the American cause. As while he's at home recovering, he is seeing other Americans being promoted above him, and he feels like that's not very fair. So that's some of the seeds of discontent in Benedict Arnold's life. Meanwhile, back in Boston, the cannons we've captured at Fort Ty in 1775 will eventually get to the city. This picture shows some of those cannons. What's going to happen is George Washington and others are going to get those cannons up onto a place called Dorchester Heights, south of the city of Boston. They're going to be able to put those cannons in place without the British noticing. How do they even notice? Well, remember we said the British leaders are just not that good, and they make some big mistakes that allows the Americans to force the British out of Boston. They're going to have to leave. They're going to go up to Canada to reorganize and plan their next move. But what is that next move going to be? Well, we'll find out when we study the war in the Middle Colony. For now, make sure you have your battle scoreboard updated with the war in the North. It goes pretty well for the Americans. We actually forced the British out, and that's what we've been wanting to do. But we certainly haven't ended the war, and everybody knows there's a long way to go. This is King George dressed up in all his finery, King George III. Here's his wife, Queen Charlotte. We've heard about him before because sometimes we call British soldiers insulting names like Georgie boy. And, well, I guess maybe Queen Charlotte does too.